Alright guys, welcome back to the channel. Today we're putting the two best gaming CPUs head to head, the 7800X3D versus the 7800X3D. Tarkov 1.0 is finally here, and the performance feedback I've gotten has been all over the place. Half of you guys are saying you've lost FPS, and the other half, myself included, are seeing better performance. So naturally, I wanted to dig in, run some fresh tests, and see what's really going on. So let's get straight into it. Before we dive into the benchmarks, here's the setup I used for testing. Both CPUs were tested on an ASRock X870E Nova motherboard paired with 64 gigs of DDR5 running at 6000 CL30 and a Zotac Solid 5090. For storage, I used an Aorus 10K Gen 5 NVMe SSD. Both chips were tuned using custom PBO profiles with maxed out F clocks, and the U clock and M clocks were synchronized 1-to-1. If you want to see the exact tuning setups I used for each CPU, check out my walkthroughs linked in the top right corner or down in the description. In terms of in-game settings, I used the equivalent of my optimized Pure 80 settings with ultra textures. These seem to have replaced the old high textures, but I'll have an updated optimization guide and an updated settings guide coming soon as well, so keep an eye out for those. To really stress these CPUs as much as possible for this comparison, I used the most demanding route on the most demanding map in Tarkov, which is Streets of Tarkov. I ran my usual path down Klimov Street into Lexos. Keep in mind, these numbers are going to look lower than the typical average FPS you might see in a real raid, because I'm only focusing on this route. And that's intentional. So like I said, your actual raid averages will probably be higher than the numbers you're going to see here. This route just gives us the best apples to apples CPU comparison. Okay, so let's take a look at the numbers. Starting with 1080p offline, which is our most CPU bound scenario, the gap between the two chips is immediately obvious. The 9800X3D hits 130 FPS average, while the 7800X3D comes in at 105. That's about a 24% uplift, and there's a similar difference in the 1% and 0.1% lows as well. This makes a big difference in a demanding map like Streets, and this is where the difference between the 98 and the 78 really shine. It's not just more frames, but smoother frame times and just less micro stuttering here and there. At 1440 offline, you'd expect the difference to shrink a little bit, but it really doesn't. The 9800X3D holds about 128 FPS, while the 78 was at 104. Again, right around a 20 to 25% lead here, and lows follow the exact same pattern, between 20 to 25% better. The numbers are very close, and the differences are very close, showing that there's still a big CPU bottleneck here. The GPU is not even really coming into play. Now at 4K offline, this is where we'd normally be really GPU bound in most games, but Tarkov is going to Tarkov. The 98 hits about 127 FPS, while the 78's at 102, just about a 25% difference again. Even at 4K, Tarkov just chews through the CPU, and that 20 to 25% uplift stays consistent through every resolution tested here. Moving into real online raids, at 1080p things tighten up a little bit, but the gap is still very similar. The 9800X3D averages 112 FPS, while the 7800X3D averages 92. It's about a 22% lead. 1% and 0.1% lows dip a bit due to server load, but the margins stay pretty similar. Even with network overhead, player interactions, AI behavior, the 9800X3D maintains significantly smoother frame delivery. At 1440 online, the gains hold steady. The 9800X3D holds at 110 FPS with the 78 at 90. Again, about a 22% advantage. The gap in lows is a little bit smaller here with 18 and 24% respectively, but still enough to noticeably reduce stutters in busy areas or if you pan the camera around quickly. And even in 1440, the 9800X3D consistently feels more stable during real gameplay. Finally, there's 4K online. The 9800X3D averaged 106, while the 78 averaged 88 FPS. It's about a 20 to 21% gain, and lows follow the same trend as before. 80 versus 68 on the 1% lows, and 72 versus 60 on the 0.1% lows. This was technically the smallest percentage gap of all the tests, but still close enough that you can see the CPU bottleneck is still in play. Usually in other games, this is where you see the bottleneck start to move over to the GPU and things kind of even out, but not so here. So across every resolution, offline and online, the 9800X3D consistently delivers a 20 to 25% uplift over the 7800X3D in basically every category: average FPS, 1% lows, 0.1% lows. What's interesting is how stable that margin is, which really shows that Tarkov 1.0 still leans extremely hard on the CPU regardless of the resolution. So here's a quick cost per FPS analysis. I'm including the RAM in this analysis because it's a huge part of the picture right now. As you may or may not know, RAM prices have nearly doubled or even tripled over the last few months. AI companies are buying up massive amounts of memory, and that's created real shortages for regular consumers like us. This, combined with the end of DDR4 production, has made prices for RAM just skyrocket for both DDR4 and DDR5. I think storage is likely to follow the same trend soon. So even though we had that brief dip in hardware prices earlier this year, I think that's over. Memory demand has pushed the cost of most components back up again. So now we have GPUs available, but you're gonna have to pay more for RAM now. To put things in perspective, 64 gigs of DDR4 with decent timings right now will cost you around $300, and 64 gigs of DDR5 with decent timings is gonna be around $400, which is kind of insane. Taking all that into account, here's what the actual cost per FPS looks like once you combine CPU pricing with current memory pricing. So the 7800X3D with 64 gigs of RAM is going to cost you about $800 on average. You can find some deals here and there, especially with Black Friday coming up, but that's the standard price. The 98 is going to be about $880, just an $80 difference. At 1080p, the 9800X3D comes in at $786 per frame, while the 7800X3D lands at $8.70 per frame. Even though the 7800X3D is a little bit cheaper up front, the lower FPS output pushes its cost per performance noticeably higher. At 1440, that trend continues. The 9800X3D sits at $8 per frame, while the 7800X3D is at $889 per frame. The gap is almost identical. The newer chip simply gives you more performance for the money, so you're getting more value out of it, even though the upfront cost is more. Lastly, at 4K, it's the same story. The 9800X3D comes in at $8.30 per frame, while the 7800X3D jumps to $9.09 per frame. So no matter the resolution, the 9800X3D ends up being the more cost-efficient option. The 7800X3D is still a beast, but with memory prices skyrocketing and the performance gap being what it is, the 9800X3D actually gives you more FPS per dollar across the board. So if you're thinking about upgrading right now and you're trying to decide between the 7800X3D and the 9800X3D, my recommendation is honestly pretty simple. Go with the 9800X3D. Right now the 78 sits around $400 and the 98 is around $480. Prices will obviously vary depending on your region and different sales that are going on, but this is based on the most common pricing. So that difference is roughly $80. For that small of a price difference, getting 20 to 25% more performance is basically unheard of. There's just no other hardware upgrade that's going to give you that kind of uplift for that little price difference, especially with RAM prices skyrocketing right now, like we mentioned earlier. Even if you already have a 7800X3D, you could realistically sell it, put that money towards a 98, and walk away with a really solid, cost-effective 20 to 25% boost in your floor. The 7800X3D is still an incredible chip, don't get me wrong, but if you're thinking about upgrading right now, the 9800X3D is simply the better play today. Now, this is all with the current pricing for the 7800X3D. I still think AMD will release a better priced 7700X3D, and it will make more sense at that point. Or the upcoming 7500X3D could be the play. But at its current pricing, I'd have to recommend the 98 over the 78 right now. Alright, that's all I've got for this one, guys. I hope it helped you out. If it did, consider hitting the like button and subscribing for more Tarkov hardware breakdowns. I've got a lot more in the pipeline. It really helps support the channel and helps me to continue bringing you hardware comparisons like this. Thanks for watching and good luck out there.